Welcome to our conversation today. We're here in our broadcast studio here in McLean, Virginia. Hope everybody's having a good week. I'm Seth Berenzweig, and I would like to jump right in by saying good morning to my law partner, Declan Leonard. Good morning, Declan.
Morning, Seth. It's great to be back here in the studio. And as always, we're joined with our executive producer, Todd Castleberry, president of BL Media Group.
Top of the morning, gentlemen. And my first question is...
You're already hitting us with a question.
I am. Let's get this party started.
I haven't even had coffee.
Am I going to have to... are you guys going to force me to wear a mask here in the workplace as we get back into this?
Seth, should we tell him? I hate to say it, Todd, but we've been trying to get you to wear one since day one. So I'm not sure.
Sir.
So we'll have to figure that one out. We'll see.
Right. So with that is that is a good start.
He's going to turn my mic down. That's what he's going to do.
That's right. He's at the controls. So be nice to Todd. Rule 1.
If I have a double chin, it's because of his editing.
Exactly. Unfortunately for you, it's live. So, look, we're here today under the topic of turning the lights back up. And I'd like to talk just for a second about what that means and what it doesn't mean. So how would you encapsulate in a nutshell what we're here to talk about today?
Yeah. We're not talking about reopening businesses. I mean, you and I have been working with our business clients over the last month, 2 months, and thankfully, a lot of them have really just been able to keep things going. It takes a lot of ingenuity to do so. It takes a lot of, a lot of effort and everything, but people have been doing that. So we're really not talking about reopening businesses as much as we're talking about reopening the office.
Right, exactly. And when we last left off, we were talking about some things that are going to be plugged into the front end of getting ready to turn back up. So now we're really talking about that next stage today. And just to kind of jump right in, one of the things that I find interesting that we're going to have to talk about first is what are the basic rules depending upon where you are located as your business and where your employees are located to understand what the rules are and what, for example, your governor has to say about what you can and cannot do.
Oh, it changes all the time. We had our great Rachel, our office assistant, and she looked at it again this morning. And, here we are in the D.C. region. We're here in our offices in Tysons. And as part of that, we're part of Northern Virginia, which, as we all know in Virginia, is treated a little bit differently. Today, actually, is the day that Governor Northam has said that businesses can, quote unquote, reopen. Northern Virginia has been exempted out of that. And so I think we're probably looking at May 28th, May 29th, somewhere around then where another decision will be made. And hopefully by then we will be able to.
So in other words, it's a definite maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Definite maybe. DC has sort of punted this one into June.
Right.
And I think Maryland also has today. Maryland's is interesting because Maryland's reopens today at 5 o'clock. I have a feeling, I have a feeling the bar industry may have had something to do with that. That's right at happy hour. But
well, it's going to be at my happy hour at my house. I'll tell you that. I'm already planning what scotch I'm opening up.
What time do we all make it there?
Yeah, exactly. But when we were talking earlier, we were talking about business uncertainty that CEOs, owners, companies, and executives are facing relative to what's going on in Washington. Not on a party versus party basis. Frankly, both sides of the aisle have been less than clear in terms of what's our way out.
The issues are bigger than that.
Yeah, and those are bigger than that anyway. But now, when we are waiting to finally hear any kind of a coordinated plan about exactly how we're supposed to reopen, then it's hurry up and wait, because now it depends on what county you're in. I live in Montgomery County. I've just learned that we're under a stay-in-place, stay-at-home order, but the neighboring county is subject to a stay-at-home advisory. So not only do we have the federal uncertainties, but now business owners and companies are going to have to navigate through these additional layers of uncertainty, which is equally frustrating.
No, that's right. But the good news, I would say, is we're talking about this issue, meaning, we started, Seth, doing these Facebook Live events, a month and a half ago. And at that time, we were talking about some dire stuff. We were talking about absolute survival for businesses. Now we're talking about, reopening, getting people back into the office, into the workplace. And we're still a little ways away, even though the governor would lift this order or that order, or this mayor would lift this order or that order. Businesses really are still going to have to do this on a case-by-case basis. They're going to have to be smart about it. Nothing's just going to be reopened with a snap of the fingers as soon as some politician says that.
So it's all about doing it safely, it's all about doing it effectively, and it's all about doing it profitably. So these are some of the contours and guideposts that we're going to be talking about today.
And we're clearly not doctors.
Right.
But it's important for companies to really look at these issues because not only do they have medical implications, but they have legal implications. I mean, you're talking about OSHA. A lot of people know the OSHA laws, which says that you have to provide a safe workplace, for your employees. And so that's why it's critical for us to have this discussion.
Right.
We've been having these discussions with our clients on a regular basis, and I suspect for the next couple of weeks, it's going to dominate those conversations.
At a minimum. Let's talk about one of the major federal pieces of regulation that sits in the background on the issue of capital deployment, because one of the key initial aspects of turning the lights back up all the way is effective deployment of capital. I think that we're beyond capital preservation right now because hopefully people have either received or are about to receive their PPP funds. What, if anything, is brand new that listeners have to be aware of when it comes to PPP?
No, that's great. When you say capital deployment, I mean, in essence, for lay people, that's do I have enough money to keep things going so that when I'm turning the lights back up, that's one area where, listen, business owners always have to worry about cash. It's what keeps us up at night a lot of times. But do I have enough money to keep this going? And as you noted, and we had a great Facebook Live 1 or 2 weeks ago about this issue of PPP, and it's dominated a lot of our client conversations about, hey, did I make the certification
Every
right?
day.
Did I make this certification?
Big time concern by CEOs.
Yes.
Big time concern.
Yes.
Yeah.
2 days ago, maybe it was 3 days ago. It's hard to keep track
Actually,
of days
I think
nowadays.
by now it's 2 days ago.
2 days ago,
Right.
the SBA finally came out with really some great guidance, which is anyone who received PPP funds of $2 million or lower, actually probably under $2 million, now their certification is going to be deemed to have been made in good faith. In other words, you met the requirements for your certification. And the thought behind it is, look, if you're getting funds below that amount to cover your costs for 2.5 months, they deem you to not have sufficient other liquidity or sources of capital. So you have what's called a safe harbor now. You still have to be careful. You still have to make sure you're using the money for payroll and everything else that it was designated for, but that is a collective sigh of relief for small businesses, all the ones we've been talking to and all the ones that have been listening to our Facebook Live events.
Yeah, I think that small business leaders are going to be able to rest a little bit easier this weekend because absent an extraordinary situation, we have now learned that they will probably not be audited. They will be presumed to have applied for the PPP funds in good faith. Another safe harbor provision, which is not quite as important, but something that people should also be aware of, is that to the extent anybody wants to return their PPP funds, the Treasury Department has one more time extended out the safe harbor return date of close of business this coming Monday.
Yeah, it was today.
It was. I think
it was yesterday.
It was
My
yesterday.
goodness, it was the 14th, yeah.
And it was just changed, so now you can have until Monday. But if you got less than $2 million, we're strongly encouraging you to realize that based upon this regulation that really literally just came out this week, that you're probably going to be fine in terms of holding to that, and you're not going to have to worry about getting attacked by the feds.
And for those that received over $2 million, and those are the bigger companies that received over $2 million, I think there's a lot of good news there too, because there was a lot of scary stories in the press about what could happen. And again, I'm talking to these clients all the time, and I look at this and I think they made these certifications absolutely in good faith, given the uncertain economic conditions, and to support their ongoing business, not the next 8 weeks, but making sure a month, a year from now that they're still going on and that people are not being forced to go back on the unemployment rolls. And so basically what this new rule said with regard to those companies, the bigger companies that received over $2 million, is that they while they will be subject to some additional scrutiny that those under $2 million won't be, at worst what's going to happen is that they will basically just not get loan forgiveness. We're not going to have mass criminal investigations and things of that nature that would tie up a business.
Everybody was worried about doing the perp walk, but actually, and listen, these are folks these are ethical people running ethical businesses, and it's right for them to be concerned. But this is important. Let me just say, by the way, throughout the broadcast, that since this is a Facebook Live event, we are taking questions. So when somebody cues in, then our executive producer, Todd, will let us know. So please feel free to jump in with a question. I look at the three basic components in my mind of the critical components of turning the lights back up. First is cash, because you have to make sure that you have your assets in place and that you have your capital deployment. But then the next two fundamental aspects of your business is bringing back your people and bringing back your customers.
Right.
Let's focus on the HR dimension of bringing the people back right now. Obviously, that's critical. And when I say bringing back, we've all been working, and we've largely been telecommuting. Our office is basically 20/80. We've got roughly 20% of the people here, 80% teleworking.
And listen, our team's been doing a phenomenal job and assisting our clients in a challenging environment, and they've been very flexible, and they've just really been doing a great job. There's no doubt.
So what are the HR considerations for bringing people back? You're talking about folks who, through no fault of their own, may be recovering from COVID, may be taking care of someone who is recovering from COVID, but now you're gradually bringing back the workforce. What kinds of HR controls do you have in terms of the ability to be able to monitor the workforce and to help the workforce as they come back into your building?
Yeah, there's a lot of considerations. First off, you're not going to be able to eliminate the risk. What we're really talking about here is managing and minimizing the risk. Each company is going to have to make this decision on its own. If it's a huge workforce, I mean, my goodness, they're going to have to stagger people coming back. If it's a smaller workforce, you know, in a big workplace, then maybe you have a little bit more leeway. You know, the big trend over the last, let's say, decade, and maybe it's even been more than that, has been open floor plans, open workspaces, shared workspaces,
like we have here.
Good for absolutely. Yeah. Although we do also have offices where you can sort of get away from things and get behind the closed door. But you know, we've been in so many of our clients' offices. We've got our good friend Bob Fox from Fox Architects, who is sort of a pioneer in this open floor plan. We've been to his offices, and a lot of other of our clients that do this or that operate in these shared workplaces. They're going to have to really think about how they operate, because that model really is conducive to sort of, you know, a lot of shared touching and touching of equipment and touching of space. And and as we keep hearing from CDC and from the doctors, that's how this is being spread.
So we're talking about temperature checks, face masks, and it's interesting because we're going to see a new era in the workplace from a HR and from a legal standpoint about the interaction between personal surveillance and individual privacy. Because in one instance, we're going to have a situation where we have to have medical surveillance to understand, do people have a fever? How are they feeling? People are also going to have an element of privacy that they're going to expect. But how do, from a document standpoint, how does a company protect itself from the standpoint of having these things occur with their employees that have never really happened at all in the recent past?
That's correct. I mean, you're not going to find a company that's coming in here saying, "Hey, can you review my pandemic policy?" It just doesn't work that way. But that's what they're going to have to do. That's what we've been working with our clients on. You've got to come up with a COVID-19 return to work policy, and you've got to have employees sign off on this because
a written policy.
It's got to be a written policy, and it's, you know, a lot of this stuff we're taking for granted. It's common sense. You got to wash your hands. You got to use sanitizer. You got to do.
We keep hearing every day.
Social distancing and all that stuff. But you know what? If you don't have it in writing, if you don't create these expectations, you know, I hate to say it, but not only is this a health issue, but it's a legal issue. And, you know, the plaintiffs' lawyers are out there, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but they're salivating in terms of claims that they could make against companies. And you do not want to open yourself up to that. So while you're never going to be able to create just a completely safe workplace, we didn't have that even before. There's always issues. But what you do have to have is you have to have policies that employees are going to abide by it. So that if you have an employee that later on, God forbid, gets COVID-19, tries to blame the internal workplace environment, you know, you may be able to point out that, listen, this particular employee did not take the safety measures that we asked and that the CDC guidelines recommended.
So you're talking about having a written policy and plan in place, having employee acknowledgments. I don't think that you need to go as far as to force a formal waiver. Frankly, I think if you have a policy and if you have a written acknowledgement, which is a little bit more diplomatic during this heightened time, it's probably going to have a comparable effect. But you're also going to have a situation in terms of company protection where if someone doesn't follow that policy, if you have to raise some kind of a contributory negligence defense down the line, which is recognized in most jurisdictions here, it's there. Hopefully it doesn't have to come up. But I think there's an optics aspect too in terms of having these kinds of things in place, not only with respect to being able to get your employees comfortably back, but getting your customers back, which is a critical component.
Oh, there definitely is. I mean, when we talk about like things that we can do to just from an optic standpoint to make people feel more comfortable coming back in the workplace. And I'm going to say right from the front, and I know this is the approach we're going to have. There's no rush. I mean, teleworking has worked pretty well. Teleworking's actually worked quite well. We have beautiful office space for which we pay a lot for each month. So we are going still to be using that. Plus, we have a cornhole out there that that I don't think people have in their own house.
Looking very lonely.
Yes, exactly. It is looking lonely. You're right.
Yeah.
But it is an optics thing. So, for instance, there's only been about 3 or 4 of us that have come into this office, and normally there's about 20, 25 of us in here. And so we've been able to obviously do social distancing, all that fun stuff. But I think it's an optics thing. I brought in these masks that I had ordered online. We got I think there was 50 of them.
You brought them in yesterday. I noticed that.
So there's only one left. So I mean, people are using them. So it's these things. Whether you can make somebody wear a mask or not, we might get that question today. I know Todd mentioned it earlier.
Clients came in. They met with you in the boardroom.
Yes.
You were socially distanced. They took a mask. We had sanitizer. We're going to bring in a private cleaning service to sanitize the office over and above what the landlord's going to do. We're going to have a written announced policy. So there is a way to get this done, and now's the perfect time to get that teed up. Todd, do we start to have some questions coming in?
And right along the lines of this discussion, this comes to us from Gabrielle. Can an employer require that a physician deem an employee high risk in writing rather than an employee asserting that category applies to them?
Yes. So in other words, I read that as, can an employee just, sort of say that, listen, I'm in a high risk category, or do you have to get a medical certification for that?
Yes.
I think
they may have asthma, for example.
They might have asthma. They might have autoimmune, any of those things, those high risk things. Here's what I tell my clients. Like, first off, I've always said don't play doctor. I have to modify that a little bit in light of all this because when people do come back to the workplace, you do have to sort of make sure that if somebody's sick coming in, you actually might have to play doctor.
Sure.
But in terms of that, what I've also been telling companies is you might not always get perfect documentation right from the get-go from an employee. So I think you can ultimately request and demand that kind of certification from a doctor. But if an employee comes to you and says, I'm high risk, I'll tell you a little bit why I'm high risk. I would say take that information and let them go with it and say, hey, listen, when you are able to, please provide me with doctor's note. But would you really want somebody that's high risk in the workplace? I think that's where you're setting yourself up for a tortious claim.
Yeah, and I think that the HR game is going to be one of nuance right now because on the one hand, you can gently tell the employee, we are going to need to maintain some files going forward just from an HR standpoint, but fear not. If you are at risk and you're concerned about leaving your house right now and your doctor's office, frankly, may not even be open potentially in terms of where the doctor is located.
That's right.
You can get that to us later. So
how many times have we heard that ultimatums never work in your personal life?
Yeah.
Ultimatums don't work here in the workplace.
Yeah.
If you say, I don't believe you, get your butt in here. I mean, how is that ever going to work? It's going to kill morale, and it creates a potentially hazardous situation.
And I think if you have an HR director who's going to help in that regard, sometimes people are more comfortable talking to HR directors rather than going directly to the partner or the CEO. Todd, another question?
Okay, this comes to us from Marvin. His question is, if a business has been able to continue to do business remotely, should the business continue to offer work from home until it is even safer to go back to work?
Great question.
Yeah, it's kind of what I said before. What's the rush?
Right.
There may be reasons why people need to actually come into the workplace. We've got an arbitration that's starting next week. And so in order to sort of team up on documents and spread out in a conference room together for the team that's actually handling that, that's a reason to come into the office. But I agree. What's the hurry? I mean, we're certainly not even looking at it for this month. We're still operating, but we're not looking to have any kind of like a widespread return to work. So, no, I think that's right. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that, but I also think that June's right around the corner, and I think that now's the perfect time for companies to message in writing and also verbally to the workforce that we are now gradually in a state of readiness to get back and reopen, and that we are going to encourage people to come back when they feel that they're ready to do it, but that it's no rush. We do need to get back to as much of a state of normal as possible, but I agree with you completely that it has to be done delicately. And also the optics are important. You know, some of the hottest breaking news issues that we're seeing on the news has to do with companies and getting second-guessed and criticized for reopening. One of the hottest news stories that I saw this week was Elon Musk and his decision to tell California,
He's
go
on fire,
pound sand. I'm going to open up my factory. I'm going to open back up. We're not going to get locked down. I want my people to come back to work. They want to work. They want to get paid. And we were getting people that were on both sides of the aisle saying, you know, you're darn right you have the right to open back up. You know, whatever happened to our liberties, versus people on the other end of the extreme saying, you know, people are going to die. We need to become a society where we can bring people into the middle with a gradual, safe reopening. There's a way to do that's exactly what we're talking about today, and making sure that you can do it in a way that protects the company and protects the employees. You can get it done.
Exactly. It's going to take a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
You're going to have to get that written policy in place. There's a number of things you're going to have to do. Our office manager, Jenny, took a huge step towards reopening our offices yesterday. She found the M&M bag, and she's refilled all of the candy jars. So, you know, I mean, Jenny, there's more we have to do, but I think that was a big step for mankind.
That's an essential task.
Yes,
by the
no
way.
doubt about it.
M&Ms. Todd, we have
And I
M&Ms.
want to know, by the way, who was hiding those in the closet.
Don't look at me.
My goodness, we've been M&M free for the last 2 months here. Clueless.
Might check the expiration date. That's just a little tidbit. All right, this comes to us from Mark. Can I allow some employees to stay work from home if they have been highly productive, but then also require other employees to come into the office that have not been as productive working from home?
I love that question, because once again, one of the great things about this program that we have is that it is so real life, and that is something that companies are going to be facing.
Sure.
We're talking about treating people differently based upon work performance, but the risks that are associated with that. What are your thoughts on that, Declan?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I always look at that whenever you're talking about treating people differently in the workplace, you know, and giving to the extent that we think that, you know, teleworking is a perk. I think a lot of people after the last month and a half might say, a perk? Are you kidding me? I mean, get me out of here. Get me out of here.
Even my dog's sick of me by now.
That's right. So I would just be worried about if these decisions are being made on any protected class. So, for instance, if you're saying, and I have not found this to be true, but if you're saying that people with families with young kids are somehow being deemed to be seen as less productive or something like that, those are protected categories in many states, in Virginia, and so I would just be very careful about making that distinction. You know, and plus, you know, what do you're kind of saying to the people that you're forcing to come in? I don't know. I just think there's a better way to do it than that.
Well, one of the things that you could do strategically as the employer is to create different kinds of relevant work pertinent categories. So, for example, maybe there's a reason why people are more effective doing certain things than others, and you can create different kinds of tasks and categories and say, for these practical, non-personal, business-related reasons,
that's right,
we would like to encourage certain people to try to come back within a certain encouraged time frame. If you can connect it to the essential functions of the job, even if you're doing it a little bit creatively, I think that's going to give you some mode of protection.
Great point. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, his follow-up to that, and you know, I can envision this. What if one of the employees that they resist and say, no, I want to work from home, and even though they're underperforming, working from home?
Well, so
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question too. You know,
where's the balance?
Yeah, my first thought is the issue that the employee. I mean, it's always how you frame these issues, and sometimes the employee frames the issue in a way that I don't believe is most appropriate in terms of how you look at it. So the employee says, "I want to stay at home," and it becomes a struggle between stay at home or go to work.
Tug of war.
Isn't the bigger issue that there's performance-related problems? I don't care where they are. They could be working from the library. They could be working from Starbucks
Great
or at
point.
the office. So focus on the
performance is work
performance
performance.
and say, listen, if you insist on continuing to stay home, and if they cloak it in a medical reason,
Yeah.
you still have to perform, or maybe you have to go on, you know, one of the family first leave or something like that.
And I also think that if you wanted to provide them with some kind of a window so that you can demonstrate if you have to defend yourself later to say, okay, look, I understand, I need you back. I need you back. I have a safe work environment. I have this written policy. I've got this protocol. We're safe. You don't believe me. This is what I'm telling you. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you have an extra 10 days to be able to accommodate yourself and to be able to have a gradual return. Put a process in place to show that you're meeting them somewhere in the middle ground, but that you still get them where you want them to be in the long run. At least that way, if you have to defend it later, you're showing that you're really bending over to be reasonable and to try to provide the best accommodations as possible.
And the focus always comes back on performance, and some of these other side issues, don't let them dominate the equation.
Well, Gabrielle with the follow-up that is part of this conversation that says they are an essential business that has some concerns regarding performance. They're seeing that some employees indicate they want to remain on telework, but their position requires that they be in the building.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting. That is something that is going to have particularly critical and broad application in our town here in Washington, D.C. So, for example, in the GovCon community, what happens if we're going through this gradual transition to, as we say, turn the lights back up? You have a complicated situation on your hands. Not only do you need to gradually bring people back into your office, you gradually need to bring people back onto the work site. And if the contracting officer says, hey,
you got to work in the skiff. I mean, you got to stay high security.
Yeah, skiffs, by the way, are not like stadiums. They're like tiny.
No,
and,
that's the whole point of them.
So what I think that's going to be a real problem related to the federal space. And so you really are going to have to be ready to make sure that you work with your employees to have a plan in place to bring people back and to let them know with as much advance notice as possible, especially in federal government contracts, that there's a requirement to be back while at the same time trying to work with the contracting officers to see if there's a way to provide accommodation in terms of appropriate spacing and workplace safety hygiene.
That's right. Be patient. Do everything you can to accommodate. But if at the end of the day, this has to be done on site, it's just the very nature of the work. I hate to say it, but as long as you've done everything you can to create a safe work environment, then that employee is not able to actually perform the job. That employee probably just needs to get a different job.
Yeah, because as we say, that would be an individual that with reasonable accommodation would not be able to perform the essential function of the job. And under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, the company is fully protected, at least in legal theory, to be able to, to part ways and move forward.
And hopefully we didn't just throw Gabrielle under the bus, but
I don't know what side she's on, but
she does great work from home, so I'm not. I fully can attest.
If anybody asks, we love Gabrielle. So
all right. So Jennifer wants to know then what are the essential points to include in a written policy, since this is all very fluid, looking for some guidance on what to include in a written policy.
Great question. Meat and potatoes. What do we need there, Declan?
Yes. So the policy is really going to be geared towards what is the company doing to ready the workplace to be safe, okay? And then once the employee gets in here, what's the employee going to do on a daily basis? And again, it gets back to a lot of those common sense but CDC mandated things, such as proper hygiene, that you're not going to be sharing computers, that you're just setting forth all of those different things. We did a policy the other day. It was probably about 5 pages long, but it really just set forth everything that guides both what the company's doing. It's all about communication at this point. And while normally you could sit down and have a conversation with them, maybe by Zoom in advance of people coming back, listen, we're lawyers. We like paperwork. We like the fact that things are in writing so that if there's any disagreement down the road, that we have this document that both sides sign off on that basically says there's a meeting of the minds. We also, by the way, and Seth, you and I talked about this, management training.
Huge.
Yeah. So
talk first to your managers. 2 phases. Integration with your managers so that they're ready to go, and then bringing in the rest of the workforce. By the way, on the question as to what should be in the written policy, I think that there also needs to be some language in there that lets the employees know that you are, and of course, this goes without saying. This is not about, we're making it happen. We're not faking it. But to make sure that your written policy reflects the reality that you care about their health and their safety. The only way that we're going to open effectively is to open safely and that we are here to make sure that we have your back when it comes to workplace safety and reopening. So
that's right. And you have to have a centralized process. Having an HR contact, having an office manager like Jenny, having an HR contact like Krista that we have here on staff, they are going to play a critical role in these coming weeks and months to make sure that this goes off well, that everybody feels safe. I mean, it's as much as making them feel safe than it is actually creating a safe space. Listen, we don't, anywhere you go can have unknown risks.
Exactly. It's in everybody's best interest to make sure that everything is perfectly safe.
That's right.
We do nothing but take one step forward and 15 steps back if we don't have a transparent, safe workplace. And that needs to be in writing, and it needs to be conveyed, and the optics need to be there.
We've talked a lot in these Facebook Live sessions about the importance of communication. It's not just a one-way road. It's not just what the companies, the managers, the HR reps, the office managers are saying. It's also what the employees are saying back. The employees have to have an obligation, and this needs to be spelled out in the policy, of in essence, self-reporting, whether it's self-reporting that they themselves are under the weather or perhaps even have been diagnosed or suspected of COVID-19, or that somebody in their household, somebody that is in their circle of friends or family has tested positive, and they really have to, communicate that back and forth. I think that's going to be the key.
I think that one of the, and we'll get to the next question in a moment, but when we're talking about in terms of turning the lights all the way back, you have to bring back your people. You have to bring back your customers. Now, we've been working with our customers. They're still out there, but we need to make that reconnection in a broader way. So what are the things that we can do to make clear not only to our workforce, but to our customers that we are able to reach out to them? I know that we can talk about things that are outside of the traditional legal box, such as being digitally agile and nimble and getting your message out there, and that's something that we're very cognizant of here, given our broadcast studio. But from more of an HR perspective, I think that it's important to note that you can reach out and let your clients know that you will space appointments, you will rotate people in, you will have social distancing, you'll have everything in your large boardrooms, there'll be sanitizers there, there's going to be PPE. So I'm missing up my acronyms.
Oh, there's acronyms, by the way, for everything. There's now an acronym for what we're talking about here today.
What's that?
Which is RTW. For return to work. It's like, my goodness. This town in particular loves its acronyms.
Yeah, well, we're here in D.C., so what do you expect? So you have to not only have your employees feel comfortable, but you have to have your customers feel comfortable. Right. We had people come in yesterday. We had social distancing. We had sanitizers. You brought in the face masks. I thought one of them, the larger one, of course, was for Todd, but we won't get into that.
Yes.
And everything went fine. So I think, again, these are the things that where you bring all the pieces back in. And if Todd's not too offended by now, he can give us the next question.
Give Seth a hard question.
Keep it coming.
He's not.
All right, this comes to us from Kate. What happens if we have some unused PPP funds at the end of the 8 weeks? What do we do with them? Do they need to be returned?
I've gotten that question over the last 2 days because people, regardless of a reason for maybe a little bit of a glitch in the calculation, maybe because you had your average payroll calculation in, but when it was finished, you didn't have the exact same head count based on that as you did before. You've got some money left over. What do you do with that money?
So I think there's two things you can do. One, in the short run, I would actually be on the phone with my lender today or Monday by the latest. For this reason, as you noted earlier, Seth, the safe harbor sort of, here, give back the money date is now Monday, the 18th.
Right.
And so what I've talked to some clients about is, listen, if you in essence, took too much, and I'm using quotes for that, took too much, because it's not like they did this on purpose. But if they've realized that, listen, our operating costs have gone down or whatever, and you don't want to worry about it on the back end to try to justify this whole 75% for payroll cost, 25% for the rest of the stuff that you use it on, you might think about talking to your lender and saying, listen, I already know, I've projected it out, I've done the spreadsheet, and I'm not going to be able to use X amount of this money. Maybe there's a way to give it back so that your loan gets recalculated at a different amount, such that when you do use it at the end of this 8 weeks, you are now at the requisite 75% for payroll costs, 25% for rent, mortgage, or interest on business or utilities.
Plus, now you can take advantage of the newly extended deadline that was granted by the Treasury, because if you get it in by Monday, you can have the double argument to say that I got it in by the safe harbor period. and therefore no harm, no foul.
And even if you don't do that, and you don't have enough to spend it on things that are forgivable, it's only the unused portion that you don't use for that. It still just becomes a loan at 1%.
Only to that amount.
Only to that amount. It is proportional, exactly.
Right.
So if you can use most of it for what it's intended for, which you're supposed to do and which you need to do at this point,
right.
Then if there's anything left over, that still just becomes a loan that's unforgivable. So I don't think that's a major issue.
Let me raise one other distinct legal issue before we go to the next question. Yes. And it has to do with a phrase that no one ever really thought about up until a few months ago, and now everybody's using the phrase force majeure. Act of God.
It's a great French dish. I had that at a restaurant. Yeah, it's excellent.
I like mine medium well.
Yes.
But anyway, we'll bring in the drums and the rim shot for the next show.
Only if it's deserving. I'm not sure that was.
Yeah, that was pretty lame. This was
your part, not mine.
Right, of course. This was earlier the most irrelevant, boring contract provision on the planet.
Oh, dear Lord,
Nobody cared about it. You stuffed it in.
Yeah.
Whoever thought we'd be in a pandemic? Yeah, right. Okay, force majeure, whatever. Move on. Nobody negotiated it. It just kind of got stuffed in there.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you have these lurking in there. One of the things that I would say to owners, companies, and executives today is pick what are your top 3 most important contracts to you. Put those on your desk or pull them up on your screen. If you're the Fred Flintstone of IT and you're like me, you'll print them out.
Yes.
But look at them. What does your force majeure clause, if any, say? Because not only is it something that you will need to be aware of with regard to whether you are going to be able or should use it as to the person on the other side of the contract, but you are going to have to be aware of the fact of whether or not that can be used against your company.
Yes.
And you've never thought of these clauses until now. They were the most staid, boring clauses, but you've got to be aware of them because you don't want to have to play defense at the end of the day.
Oh, I mean, and it's not just contracts. I think once the dust settles a little bit and executives get a chance to sort of catch their breath, and I think they should also be looking at their insurance policies. I was talking to a good friend, Scott Holden, down there in Old Town Alexandria, a great insurance guy, and Scott and I were talking about this because as soon as this hit, what did everybody do? They went to their insurance policy and they said, does this cover it? Does it not cover it? And more often than not, it's not being covered. Viruses are being exempted from coverages for things like interruption of business and other liability issues, such as what we're talking about here if something were to happen in the workplace.
And don't assume, by the way, although I think the better argument that it is an act of God, don't assume that you're going to be free to argue to a court later with zero risk that a pandemic is or is not an act of God. I think that there's an argument that it is, but put it in there, because if you even have a slowdown or a temporary work stoppage, put in epidemic/pandemic, because you want to make sure that it's covered. You don't want to have to argue it at the end of the day. And also, there are going to be new negotiations in place that you're going to want to think about. Okay, what if there's a slowdown? What if there's a temporary stoppage? Who bears the costs of that? How do we bear the costs of that? How does that even work? No one ever talked about this before. Now it's going to be a really big deal, and it's going to really mean real dollars to the bottom line.
Yes.
So, okay, Todd.
Okay, this comes to us. I love this. We got viewers double teaming on questions here, and this is great. Steven starts it off with, if we enter self-reporting in our return to work policy, doesn't that flirt with an invasion of privacy? How do you articulate that in writing? And Jennifer has the same question, and it says also to expand on that, what about taking temperatures?
Well, that's a great question, and then that's the issue that we touched upon briefly earlier on the issue of surveillance versus privacy.
We would never have been talking about this in the HR context about this invasion of somebody's medical. What's your temperature today?
Can you imagine before saying, "Hi, what's your temperature?" Excuse me?
Stand still while listen. I think I told you this. I bought the other day. I bought a non-contact thermometer for the office, so that when we're back. I mean, we'll have to talk about it. I don't know. It's still clunky to me, like in terms of doing this. But we may very well have a situation where if it's just a zap to the forehead, non-contact, we'll have our front office person, Rachel Goodnight, zapping people as they come in with her lovely smile, saying, "How are you doing today?" She'll also be zapping you and say, "Oh, you're 98 point."
The new Star Wars.
Yeah, and I know Nick, our colleague Nick will always be. He's so competitive. He'll always be trying to get the best temperature.
Yeah,
he'll be like,
he'll brag about it.
Yeah, he'll definitely brag about it.
Yeah, but I think that the question also related to self-disclosure, and I think it's important for the employee to really try to lean towards self-disclosure.
It's an obligation, I think.
I think it's an obligation.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to claim a failure to provide a reasonable accommodation if the employer is not aware of the condition that requires the accommodation. And I think that you're really going to have a grateful workforce and colleagues to the extent that you've disclosed not only whether you have a COVID condition, but whether you, for example, have taken care of your mom or your child when he or she has COVID. So self-disclosure, always the best policy. But as has been said, we're living in a new age. So I think that this information is just going to get teed up right now.
No, you're right, Todd. One thing I do want to hit on before we hit our 1 hour, child care issues. There's a question, I think it was like number 4 or something that I saw come in. But child care issues, if you want to hit that one, because I think, candidly, that's going to be the number one issue for the next couple of months going into the next school year.
Yeah, this came to us from Becky, and it is a great question. How do I juggle childcare over the summer with no camps?
Great question.
I mean, so the Families First leave, we did a whole Facebook session on that. That might have actually been our first one. Gosh, it seems so long ago, but it was only about a month and a half ago, on the Families First leave. And a lot of the focus of that was on this notion that schools had shut down, kids were home, and parents were juggling these dual roles, and so it did give them a bit of relief if they wanted to do so, and if they had no other choice basically to do so, and couldn't telework given the family situation, they could take advantage of this leave, and they would get a certain level of pay. I've always thought it was an underwhelming amount in terms of the pay, so it wasn't the most viable. But so that's going to be an ongoing issue, though, because now we're getting towards the end of the school year. A lot of the online learning has sort of petered out, so we're not even going to go to the mid to later June months that Fairfax, Montgomery County, some of these other schools have gone to.
Camps are done. Summer camps are done.
Camps have been canceled, yeah.
Right.
So the question is, how do families, employees that have kids, and had planned on camps for the summer, things of that nature.
Sure.
I mean, they're looking at this saying, COVID-19, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to, keep my family together and try to put as much brain power towards my employment as I can. And I applaud them. I mean, they're doing a great job. I know we see it in our own firm where people are really just juggling, and we probably don't even know, Seth, behind the scenes how much they're a little bit of suffering in silence that is tough.
Yeah, they have kids home. It's tough, and we keep in mind in the background that we have, under the recent relief acts from Congress, these continued protective provisions with regard to extended family and medical leave to be able to take care of your kids, and these are important protections.
Yes. Now, there are some, remember when they passed this, they were passing it because schools were closing. It says school closings or child care closings. So now the question is this.
What happens?
Child care. What if you have a 12-year-old whose camps, my daughter Maura is all bummed that her dive team has gotten canceled.
How does that fit in?
Yeah, how does that fit in?
Yeah.
Are we hopefully that they'll step in and they'll clarify the regulations, because that is a 12-week period. It runs out at the end of December 31st, so the end of this year.
Right.
But hopefully that becomes a viable option for parents to be able to use if they need to this summer. That's what I believe, more so than the sickness. The numbers that are impacted by child care issues are far greater.
Huge.
I recognize there's health effects, including dying, and that is a travesty. But these child care issues are something that is not, in my opinion, getting enough attention.
It plugs right into the ability to go back to work, directly related. Todd,
Completely.
next question.
Okay, from Marvin, as a consulting firm, it's obviously everybody wants their employees to remain healthy, but especially when the core business is built on the work of the consultants. With that said, is there a way to get them to continue to be responsible outside of work and tell them that they have a responsibility to take care of themselves and avoid exposure. Is there a legal way to request that from them?
Very
Sure.
interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, not only are employees responsible, one of the essential functions of the job is not only adequate work performance, but continued safety. OSHA requires the company to maintain a safe workplace. General laws also require maintaining a safe workforce and also a safe workplace at the federal worksite, for example. So I think it's entirely reasonable and frankly expected that the company continues to provide objective criteria to its workforce to make sure that they employ safe and sanitary interactive practices so that they maintain the kind of social distancing and the things that need to be done, not only to keep them safe, but to keep their work colleagues safe as well, right?
That's right. I think this is something that gets back to the written policy. The expectation should be in there
Right.
that employees. It gets back to the written policy and the self-reporting. And you know, now we have social media, so we kind of know what people are doing a lot of times when they're not, you know, during regular work hours. And so, you know, I think that written policy has to say, listen, you agree that even in your off time, these are unprecedented times where we can really intrude this way. You agree during your off time that you're not going to take the train up to New York. You're not going to, you know, to hang out in Manhattan.
point.
You're not going to go to
Yes.
a crowded party or a concert. Not
Yeah.
that these concerts are even
Great
happening.
point. That should be in there.
Yeah, normally you would never do that. You would never try to police what people
Right.
do. But now, as you said under OSHA, it's
Yeah.
a two-way street to maintain a safe
has
work
to be.
environment, and
Yeah.
it's not just on the company.
Yeah.
There's got to be compliance. And if there's a picture online of your employee in the middle of a huge party over the weekend, I think
In
you
downtown
I think you
Manhattan.
not only have the right but the obligation to speak
Yeah.
up for the safety of your other employees.
It's going to get tricky. It's going to get complicated. And it's also going to get complicated with regard to the requirement in upcoming government contracts to have a workforce
Yeah.
travel to and report to a group project for a federal agency. So let's say, for example, someone has to fly to San Diego for a project that's going to have 50 people near a skiff
Oh yeah.
in September or even July. What do you do about that? Travel needs to be essential. Contact the customer, see whether being in person is absolutely essential, and have protective provisions in place in advance and let your people know we have to be there. We're going to be there talking about fixing satellites. We can't do this from home. But here is how we're going to structure it in a way where we're going to make sure that you're safe while you're there. There's a way to get it done, but you have to have the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
No inflexible thinking in order to be successful here.
Yeah.
There is absolutely a way. People talk about essential travel, but then when you really peel back the layers, sometimes it's not always that essential. As you just mentioned, if you're working on a satellite, if you're working on something that's hands-on, then yeah, that's probably something where you do have to be there in person. But you know what? Just making that in-person connection, which I love and I always have been a big proponent of, you know what? For a while now, until we see where things go, particularly for the rest of the year, companies really should just say their instinct should be about travel. They should have the no reflex and just basically say, no, we're not going to do it.
Try to halt the travel if practicable. The other thing that I just want to throw in before, Todd, we get to the next question is this. There's been a lot of conversation, understandably, about health issues as it relates to the family. Keep in mind, effective July 1, there is a brand new law that's coming into effect in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it is a new pregnancy protection law. And there are new rights that are coming into effect effective July 1 with regard to accommodations for women who are pregnant.
Yes.
Therefore, I think this is going to be an issue that's also going to be coming up this summer, because if someone who is expecting has, and I'm sure they will at times have unique issues with regard to COVID, and they're going to have, unique health issues, understandably, I think companies need to be ready for this, because this is something that never existed before with regard to this specific legal issue in Virginia, and it's right around the corner.
It's a real potent law. It actually just sectors out pregnancy and specifically and builds upon that a new cause of action, new reporting requirements. Companies in Virginia or who employ Virginia who have workers who are working in Virginia need to make sure that they update their employee handbooks. Again, there's a little bit of time, and we've been reaching out to some of our clients on this. this, but there is a little bit of time. But that's a great point that they need to be aware of it.
And one other wrinkle to that law, it's the only such claim where the individual does not have to go to the EEOC to exhaust an administrative claim.
Yes.
Or what's called the local federal protection agency, or what we call a FEPA.
Yep.
You can go right to court because the law recognizes. You like that acronym, Todd?
FEPA.
FIFA, I have
It's
no
called a
idea what he
FEPA.
just
so
said. Yeah,
cute.
yeah.
Exactly. It's warm and fuzzy. Sorry, I'm a DC lawyer. But given obviously the fast nature of how issues arise during the course of a pregnancy, I think the state legislature recognized that people aren't going to be able to sit around for a year while their claim lingers in a dusty office at the EEOC. So that is a claim that can go right to court. It's one of the only claims where that can go right into court. So it can happen overnight, and the company's not going to be aware of this a lot of times until it hits. Todd, next question.
Okay, this comes to us from Ashley, who is in HR. What if for a new hire, I can't get their documents for I-9 compliance, which I'm supposed to see in person?
Great question. Christian Zek on our team is the immigration specialist, but I do know that, so just so we know, I-9 is, whenever anybody starts as a new employee, they're required to give identifying documents, and there's a whole schedule of what you can provide, things like passports, licenses, things like that, to show that not that you're a U.S. citizen, but that you're eligible to work in the United States. That's really kind of the main question there.
And traditionally, you were required to verify those in person.
Yeah,
right?
it's a very strict. It was a strict policy that basically said, look, we want an HR person or an office manager to see those, with their own eyes,
See if they're legit.
Exactly. But obviously, because some people are being onboarded virtually, they have relaxed that standard, and they're now allowing that I-9 process to happen virtually. You can scan the documents in, things of that nature. So that's just listen. It's just a common sense approach that they're using. I mean, rather than to hold up somebody starting because of this process, that would have been absolutely ridiculous. So it's good to see that they did that. Good question, Ashley.
Right.
Okay, more HR from Portia. What if an employee does not want to return to work because they are making more money on unemployment?
Well, this is one of the dangers we talked about earlier.
We've seen that a lot, and at this point, I think now that if there's work to be done, whether it's telework, whether you can work remotely or work on site in what is a safe environment, and you have an employee that wants to stay on unemployment longer, again, I preach patience because, these employees, just like company owners, these employees have been, sort of just thrown into this upheaval. They didn't ask for this, and so they're just trying to manage it. So what I would personally say is, look, I would give it a little bit of time, perhaps, if they wanted to make it through May. But if by June or middle of June or something, they still don't want to come back, I think that that's probably symbolic of something deeper, and I probably would say that's fine. You stay on unemployment. Guess what? It's going to run out after a while anyways, but we're filling your job.
Well, and I think diplomacy in writing is key, too, because I think being able to demonstrate on the optics, even for the protection of the executive in the company, is something that's also helpful because let's just recognize one thing. Not only are business executives and owners and HR professionals being caught in a maze where the feds are really not giving them a very good idea what to do. The governors are really not giving them a very good idea to do. And even the local county officials are making them feel whipsawed. But we're living in an age right now where the media is frankly coming after companies and attacking them for trying to reopen. This is something that I consider to be a relevant issue, and I'm not going to harp on it long, but I think that one of the reasons why we want to be very careful with respect to how we open and how we manage the optics is because we're in a situation where the media is coming after the Elon Musks of the world who are trying to reopen. And this is a real problem. Companies need to be able to get back to business. They need to do it safely. They need to do it responsibly. We have to make sure that everything is done in a safe and responsible manner. But we have to recognize that we're going to be under the microscope right now. And that's unfortunate. But that's just one of the realities that we're dealing with in the new business world. And, and I think that we have to be cognizant of that.
Yes. I mean, we have to know that when businesses do reopen in terms of coming back to the office place, the press is going to be on the hunt for the bad stories.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, oh my gosh, this one opened and there's been no problems, and guess what? They're all getting along and it's all
Right.
good. They're going to be looking for the bad issues. Companies are going to have to be a little bit more resilient, be able to withstand that, not have panic mode mindset, and just do the best they can
Right.
in terms of being patient and communicating with employees. By the way,
Right.
just as an offshoot of that, you mentioned Elon Musk. I was listening to radio on the way in today, and the owner of Barstool Sports, the online thing,
David Portnoy.
David Portnoy, he's got a rant that is making the rounds today. I think it's up to 6 million views.
What is that?
It's a rant about not reopening.
Okay.
It's
Well,
whatever
it's
you're.
about changing the goalposts of
Yes.
flattening the curve till we have to find a cure.
Yes. He's basically.
Right.
He's
Exactly.
He's basically saying, look, and again, people have
Yeah.
reasonable arguments on both sides of this.
Right.
But his point is well taken, which was, look, we were supposed to really work on flattening the curve. I think we're
did
we're
that.
getting close
Right.
there.
Yeah, we've
or
done
we're
that.
in the process of doing that exactly. But
Right.
he's basically saying now he's looking at things like Los Angeles, where the mayor's talking about until there's a cure, we're really never going to truly reopen. And he's saying you're moving the goalposts here.
Yeah. Todd, let me ask you your impression on this, because I want to bring you in this part of the conversation. We were told, and again, the intention overall of this conversation is to be bipartisan. This is not looking at one party or another. Both sides of the aisle have more than their share of flaws. But we were told, businesses were told, stay at home, let your people stay at home, flatten the curve, because the worst thing that can happen is to get an overloading of the medical system. For the most part, we've done that, but now we're being told that now we're going to have to go beyond that and wait for a cure. What's your perspective on that? Because honestly, I'm having a problem with that.
Well, and that ties into was our next question in this entire conversation. Aside from New York and New York City,
Yes.
which but the other parts of the country where clearly you're not seeing hospitals that are flooded. And Portnoy and what Elon Musk are saying, which ties into the question. This is not a zero-sum game, right?
Right.
If you got 10 employees, 100 employees, 2,500 employees, it's not going to be 100%. And
Right.
that's the pervasiveness of this. But at one point, which we've all sat back for months now, and
Months.
months.
Yeah.
So what I'm in agreement with his perspective, and which is why it got the traction that it got, because it's not going to be 100% safety going backward. It's just that's impossible. It's not going to happen.
We're never going to have zero risk. We're never going to have zero risk.
None. So I'm on that side of this
Right.
particular suggestion here.
Join us next week as we have Dr. Fauci join us for our next Facebook Live.
And so the last-
Seth's gonna wear a scarf for Dr. Burks.
Wash
The
your
la-
hands.
The last question is, which ties into this: can my company get sued if an employee or visitor gets sick after being in our workplace?
I mean,
So
this is
exposure from
Yeah.
Yes.
from Portnoy
Yes.
to Elon Musk to
Yes.
anybody here.
And of course, the sad answer is your company can get sued for anything. The question is,
No matter how
is it a
frivolous.
viable? Would it be a winning lawsuit? And that's a lot of what we're talking about here today. We're
protect
talking
yourself.
about minimizing the health impact
Right.
and also minimizing the legal risk. I mean,
Yeah.
if you've got an employee who signed a policy, the COVID-19 policy that said, I'm going to come into work and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then they somehow get sick. I
Right.
think that if a company is taking all reasonable precautions and the
They
employee
have the right
is
documents in place. They're
right
gonna be able to
documents in
demonstrate
place,
that.
exactly,
Yeah.
and is doing this in a common sense way. They're not jumping the gun. They're not creating ultimatums for people
Right.
necessarily. They're trying to be flexible on telework and everything like that. I just don't think these cases are going to be successful. Now, are they going to be tried? Are there going to be class actions? Of course. Like I said, the plaintiffs' lawyers are salivating on this. I don't think it's going to work. They're going to try a couple of different things. There's going to be tortious claims. There's going to be workers' compensation claims. But I don't think at the end of the day, because it's such a
claims. There'll probably be some claims under some collective bargaining agreement.
Yes, but because it's such a mysterious disease that we don't even know. We're learning every day in terms of how it spreads and how it impacts some people.
Everybody's doing their best. They're doing
Yes.
the best they can.
Yeah. I want to raise one more thing, and then if we hit one last question, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I do want to just talk about how that comes into play here, because what we're really talking about is medical problems and potential disability-related issues. The Americans with Disabilities Act is not going to be an absolute bar for you in terms of like talking to an employee if the employee is feeling sick, you can absolutely send that employee home. Under prior to coronavirus, it probably would be seen as a bit heavy-handed and maybe as perceived disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But by the same token, so I think the American Disabilities Act will not act as a bar for employers to be responsible in maintaining a safe workplace. But my only caveat that I want to throw out there is companies also have to be take common sense approach and not typecast employees. If you've got employees that are over, let's say, a certain age, you can't just all of a sudden assume they may have perfect health, so you can't just all of a sudden assume that they're a high-risk individual. That's got to be a little bit more of a dialogue. You can't just say, you know what, everybody over 70 not allowed back in the workplace. I just don't think that that's going to be the appropriate way we do this. We should look at it on a case-by-case basis, and if they have particular vulnerabilities, they're not going to want to come back in, because who wants to expose themselves to this?
And before we go to the last question, I'd also like to say that these dynamics are particularly crucial and also particularly complex for the world of small business, which is really, among other things, one of the main aspects of our clientele. We're not an airline. We're not J.P. Morgan. We're not Goldman. We can't go and say that we're too big to fail. Our industry can't come in and say, can I have my $25 billion? And by the way, I have no problem with them making their way to survive, because we need banks and we need airlines.
They're critical for the economy.
Everybody's critical for the economy, and I'm not shunting that. But small businesses are going to continue to be very vigilant about really staying strategic on this. Cost down, revenues up, get the right documents in place, and stay flexible, because PPP is a great thing, and hopefully people have been able to get that relief. But we're really kind of in betwixt and in between right now, because we don't typically get large bailouts. There's not going to probably be another round of PPP, and that's why small businesses are going to have unique challenges moving forward. But they're also crucial, and they're the reason why turning their lights all the way back up is so critical to being able to get the country back up and running again.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, to bring this discussion full circle, gentlemen, and aside from my optically challenged mug,
the last question
can you force me to wear a mask in the workplace? Can an employer make an employee wear a mask in the workplace?
I think the short answer to that is yes. I think they can. I think employers, if they decide, and I hope they do this in a common sense, basis, and I hope they look at it, and so for instance, our workplace. I mean, we have like sort of a more traditional, I would call this a more traditional workplace. We've got some open areas. Like I said, we've got cornhole right around the corner there. That I don't think anyone's beaten me yet here. So I mean, that's a different issue.
I hear a challenge. I hear a challenge.
I mean, Todd. Yeah.
I'll keep that.
But I think so for us, we have offices that have doors on them and everything like that. So I think for us it probably would be potentially just optional. We'll have them up front like we did before. But I think there's a lot of other workplaces where it might make sense to do so. And if the company decides to require masks worn in the workplace just the same way that I tried to go into Home Depot in D.C. the other day and had to wear a mask also, which is a good thing. I just happened to forget mine. But I think they can do so. Yes, I think they can. And in fact, there's an interesting, just a quick aside. I know we're getting close to the end.
We're wrapping up here.
Yep. But there's an article that was in the press the other day where a law firm, somebody who worked for a law firm, he went on a rant on social media, and it was a little bit of a violent rant, and it had some gun references and things of that state, because he was so mad that stores were making him wear a mask. They ended up just firing him. They just basically said, why do we want somebody like that volatile in the workplace? Yeah. Both sides have to really just kind of have patience and a common sense approach. And if you have to wear a mask, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you?
Keep the temperature down. Keep the strategy moving forward, and keep listening to our show.
Yes.
Everybody stay safe this weekend.
Don't forget to follow us on social media.
Yep, please follow us on social media. We're going to continue to have these broadcasts here from our studio here in our office in McLean, Virginia. Everybody, be well, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time.
Enjoy this great weather.